Teham shadimam tvam prapannam dehinosmin yata dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhirastatra namuyati neha bikramana shosti pratyavayo na vidyate swalpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayad Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sanghasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama kamat krodho bhijayate krodhat bhavati sammoha sammohat smriti vibramaha smriti brimshat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati Yagyartat karmano anyatra loko yam karma bandhanaha tadhartam karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara yadyadacharati shreshtas tattadhevetaro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokastadhanu vartate Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidyenam Iha Vairinam Saevayam Mayatedhya Yoga Prokta Puratanaha Bhaktosi Me Shaka Cheti Rahasyam Hietaduttamam Vidya Vinaya Shampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Suni Chaiva Svapakecha Pandita Samadarshinaha Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Shuhrdam Sarvabhutanam Nyatvam Mam Shantim Richati Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenantaratmana Shraddhavan bhajate yo mam same yukta tamo mataha. Translation. And of all yogis, the one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Hare Krishna. Looks like most of you prefer to sit on the floor. Maybe I should use the Vyasasana now. Okay, we'll start from the 5th chapter. There was one question that was asked last week during the question hour, which we parked. I thought we'll start our session today answering the question. So from 3rd chapter onwards, we have been hearing if we do our activity as a sacrifice, which means we do it as a matter of duty, then if you do that, it will give knowledge, and such knowledge will liberate us, and that in turn will help us to perform devotional service. Somebody was asking to elaborate on this by giving an example. There is a real-life incident of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. As you know, he is the spiritual master of our dear Srila Prabhupada. So once he gives a class, he gives a big lecture, and there was one learned scholar who comes to Bhakti Siddhanta, and he asks him, I have a question. So then Bhakti Siddhanta interestingly replies him, telling him that, go to the kitchen, wash the pots, and then come back and meet me after an hour. So this gentleman follows, goes to the kitchen, washes the pot, comes back and meets Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And much to the surprise of everyone, he says, all my questions are answered, and he just walks away. So that's the answer to the question. So the point we have to understand from this episode is, every activity has two aspects to it. One is the gross physical activity that we do. Let's say if I actually sweep the temple room. So there is a physical activity that I'm doing. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is something which is happening in a much, much more subtler level. Something that's happening on our consciousness level, mind level, intellectual level, and ultimately something is happening on our spiritual level. Now, if somebody does an activity without any knowledge of Krishna consciousness, without any knowledge of subtle body, gross body, without any knowledge of yoga, he would simply do the activity. Even the physical activity will give him knowledge on a physical level. For example, you will see some jugglers in the streets. They'll juggle 20 bottles. They are doing something on a physical level, but they are gaining knowledge as time passes. They'll be able to even do multiple things also. You will see. They'll balance themselves on a roller. They'll do even skating. They do so many other things also. So something that's happening even on a gross level is actually giving gross level knowledge. Now what Krishna speaks here is, if you do the same activity, but completely understanding that we are not the body, we are the soul. Remember, we said that's the underlying knowledge in every activity, starting from the second chapter onwards. The second chapter, Krishna says, we are not the body, we are the soul. So every activity that you actually do, we may not realize it, but at least knowledge sake, we should have that. So once we have even that preliminary level of knowledge and we start to perform the activity, yes, gross level activity does give us a gross level expertise. You can be a mridanga player, for example. You can just play mridanga, and you will see sometimes people just walk in, kirtan programs, walk in, even on a Sunday feast. They would have no idea who Krishna is. They'll have no idea who devotees are, no idea about Bhagavad Gita, nothing. They'll just pick up the mridanga and they'll play, just simply because they have that inclination to play. We have music teachers here. So we have that skill. With that skill, we'll be able to come and offer some knowledge, some service. Sometimes you will see some people go to the kitchen and they start cooking. They don't know that they are cooking prasad. They don't know that's even vegetarian or not. People don't even know. Once I remember I had a volunteer, he was asking me for onion. So people don't even know, but they like to do service. But as you keep doing it over and over again, they will develop that knowledge on a gross level, which means expertise in actually doing that activity on a physical level. But what Krishna speaks about is, in the same way, because you have that little knowledge, little inclination about yoga, what you'll also do is, this knowledge you develop on a gross level, that's true. You will also develop knowledge on a more spiritual level. And just like how it said that if you spend 10,000 hours in any activity only, you become an expert in that. Okay, you can be a salesman, you can be a speaker, you can be a pianist, you can be a flautist, you can be a drummer, anything. You can be a cook. If you spend 10,000 hours in any activity, you become an expert in that. So that's not happening, as I said, on a physical level, but the same thing also happens on a spiritual level. Now, this is a bit more tangible. This one is not, but you can still feel it. Over a period of time, we'll see things which we used to be attached to is no longer the case for us now. Okay, initially when you come to Krishna consciousness, you start to eat sweets, you do some things initially when we have free time, we tend to sleep a lot. But then now, over a period of time, hearing about it over and over again, reading about it, we realize actually there is not much pleasure in sleeping. And we give it up naturally. Effortlessly, we'll let it go. So that's what happens here. So any activity when we actually do in Nishkama Karma Yoga, remember there were 3 conditions we said. The activity itself, second is you work in knowledge, and as I said, the fundamental principle of that knowledge is we are not the body, we are the soul, and we are detached to results. If we perform an activity in that condition of Nishkama Karma Yoga, By virtue of simply doing that activity over a period of time, we will develop transcendental knowledge. Once we develop that transcendental knowledge, even the basic fundamental principle of this knowledge also gets deepened, which is, we are not the body, we are the soul. Naturally, we will get liberated. Prabhupada said, liberation doesn't mean you suddenly manifest 4 hands. It doesn't mean that. Prabhupada says liberation means liberation from birth, death, disease, old age. That's what Prabhupada says. So liberation means once you align yourself more to understanding that you are not the body, you are the soul, which means you align yourself more with the soul than with the body, naturally you will get liberated. And in that state, the most natural activity to do is devotional service. Anything which we will do will become devotional service. So that's how the connection is actually given here. Any questions on this aspect? Because it's important that we understand this, because from chapters 3 to 5, basically there is only 2 or 3 concepts, but this is the most important concept. How, when we do an activity, there is a gross aspect, there is a subtle aspect. You gain knowledge in both the aspects, but that subtle aspect, which is the spiritual knowledge, naturally leads you to liberation, and naturally you will engage in devotional service without any extraneous endeavor, without any much exertion. You will naturally do it. And Prabhupada says, just like how you take a fish out of water, it will feel suffocated. So similarly, when we progress on this path of Krishna consciousness, there will come a point when if we don't do Krishna conscious activity, we will feel suffocated. Long way to go, but we'll get there. But that's how the process works. How exactly it works, we don't need to break our head. This process is very sublime, which means you just keep doing, everything else will simply follow without any other extraneous work. Now, somebody actually asked me last week on a similar note, in the 3rd chapter we studied about the cycle of sacrifice. How is it me doing some sacrifice, some yajna is pleasing the demigods? Is Indra not having enough access to ghee? Doesn't he know enough mantras? Why is he feeling so satisfied? The example that's given, I was giving example of Western Union. Okay, so this is like a foreign exchange company, in simple terms. You put money here in Australian dollars, go to India, you can draw money in rupees. Same thing, you put in Australian dollars here, you go to US, you can draw in US dollars. You go to European country, you can draw in euros. How exactly is that transformation happening? Is that exchange happening? We don't need to bother. All we need to know is, there's a company called, or there is a shop called Western Union. I just need to go, I can give in any local currency, I can draw it anywhere. So same way, scriptures say, to the extent we can understand, let us understand the principles of yajna and simply follow the principles of yajna, which means giving an Australian dollar. How exactly is that transformation happening? Puranas explain in detail, Vedic scriptures explain in detail, but it's beyond the scope. So exactly same way, if we do an activity, chanting Hare Krishna, how is it we are actually getting liberated and coming to devotional service? We don't need to break our head, but on a high level, principle level, these are the different steps that's happening. You do the activity, it gives knowledge. Now, with that knowledge, you will naturally feel liberated, and then you will engage in devotional service. That's how this one works. So we finished the previous chapter. Previous chapter, Krishna spoke in detail about transcendental knowledge, and we also saw how Krishna chose Arjuna, who is a Kshatriya, to give this transcendental knowledge. We also saw how it's the duty of the Kshatriyas not to just protect people on a gross level, but also on a spiritual level, but also on a mental level, intellectual level, holistic level. They need to protect them. And then towards the end of the previous chapter, Krishna tells Arjuna, especially in verse 41 and 42. Let's read that, then we'll understand the connection. So go to 4th chapter, 41st verse. So the translation, one who acts in devotional service, renouncing the fruits of actions, and whose doubts have been destroyed by transcendental knowledge, is situated factually in the self. That means he is self-realized. He is clearly realizing that he is not the body, he is the soul. Thus he is not bound by the reactions of work or conqueror of riches. Therefore, the doubts which have arisen in your heart out of ignorance should be slashed by this weapon of knowledge, armed with yoga. O Bharata, stand and fight. Krishna is very persistent. No matter what he says, Krishna is asking Arjuna, pick up the bow and fight. And Arjuna is getting confused because Arjuna is also sort of hell-bent towards not fighting. So whatever Krishna says, Arjuna is wanting to use all of those reasons to counter-argue, to tell to Krishna, because of these reasons I won't fight. You ask me to work in knowledge. In knowledge, if I think in knowledge, I understand about the temporary nature of this world, and I see none of these worldly pleasures is going to give me much satisfaction, so I'm going to relinquish this, and I'm not going to fight. This is Arjuna's take. Krishna's take is, if you gain all this knowledge, now you start working in this knowledge, kill all the enemies as a matter of duty, and be detached. This is Krishna's take. But this verse 41 confuses Arjuna, because in 41 Krishna is saying, be situated in knowledge, be situated in self and everything. But in 42, he's also told to pick up his bow and fight. So that confuses Arjuna. And as we saw, it's a similar question which Arjuna asks in chapter 3. He asks in chapter 5. So the first 6 verses, Arjuna asks about, what should I do? Should I work? Or should I just renounce all my activities? Should I fight? Or should I just sit and cultivate this knowledge? Tell me one. Don't confuse me. As I was touching on this, there is one primary difference between chapter 3 and chapter 5. Both are called Karma Yoga. However, chapter 5 is called Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness, which means there is something more to just calling this as Karma Yoga. So in chapter 3, if you see, Krishna agrees with Arjuna that the process of cultivation of knowledge, which is Jnana Yoga, is greater than Karma Yoga. However, Krishna tells to Arjuna, for you, Karma Yoga is better. It's like saying, let's say I have milk and I have water. Between the two, we can argue milk is always greater. But you can't just live just drinking milk. You need water. You need to drink water. Okay, so it's not a question of always what is best. It's always a question of what is best for you. What's best for each one of us. So, which is better, to be a teacher or to be an army man? Good for one, Prabhupada says, what is food for one is poison for another. So, these two are relative. So, Krishna says, between the two, Jnana Yoga is greater. However, Arjuna, you being in a Kshatriya's body, for you Karma Yoga is better. So forget about Jnana Yoga. So this is what Krishna says in chapter 3. Now in chapter 5, Krishna will take the same knowledge but in a much more deeper level. Krishna will still agree. Yes, if you look in terms of the ladder, there is Karma Yoga, there is Jnana Yoga, there is Ashtanga Yoga, and then there is Bhakti Yoga. The same thing holds true still, but if you actually look at it deeper, Arjuna, Krishna gives few attributes of Karma Yoga, which Krishna first says, which makes it equal to Jnana Yoga, and then Krishna takes it much deeper and he says, actually Karma Yoga is greater than Jnana Yoga. In one sense, Krishna contradicts himself. Is he contradicting really? No, on a superficial level, this is true. But if you really go deeper, the converse is true. Sanatana Goswami, he gives an example which he uses it in a different context, but I'll draw parallel to this. He says if you take ice, okay, you take water, you reduce the temperature, it becomes ice. You keep on reducing it. Okay, take it to minus 50, minus 100, minus 200. It becomes like really dry, but it's still cold, dry ice. But if you keep on reducing it, at one point, what will happen is, even though you are reducing and technically the temperature should actually go more and more colder, there will come a point where even that most coldest object will change its nature and it will become extremely hot. So he gives that example to draw parallel with the mood of separation of the gopis. So Krishna is not with gopis, Krishna is away, but they think about him so much, at one point, in that separation they feel the union. It's very hard for us because in material world, if you do that, it's a psychological condition, actually. It's something abnormal. But that is true in spiritual sense. So same way, externally, I'm just drawing parallel, a crude example. Externally, yes, Jnana Yoga is greater than Karma Yoga. However, let us say, in a context like this, there are 100 people in the room, and we say, who prefers Jnana Yoga? One hand goes up. And who prefers Karma Yoga? 99 hands go up. So we all conclude Karma Yoga is greater. Okay? Simply in terms of practicality, in terms of application. That's what I was looking for. In terms of application, Karma Yoga is superior. So Krishna first says, few reasons he gives. First he says, Karma Yoga is equal to Jnana Yoga. Krishna then says, Karma Yoga is easier. Krishna says, Karma Yoga actually gives Jnana also, which means you don't need to separately endeavor. You remember, we saw the previous equation. Activity leads to knowledge. So you don't need to separately endeavor for Jnana Yoga. And then Krishna finally says, by the way, Arjuna, Karma Yoga is greater than Jnana Yoga. So in the first section, Krishna gives these 4 attributes actually. If you read the verses, I'll leave it to you, but basically this is the attribute Krishna says. He says, Karma Yoga is same as Jnana Yoga. Why? Somebody who's a Jnana Yogi has 2 choices. He can do activity, he don't have to do activity. But if the person in knowledge, who is detached to results, who is not lazy to do his activity, he falls under both the categories. You remember, we saw in the 3rd chapter, but still Krishna urged Arjuna to do. Why? To set some good example. He has the choice to do work, he has the choice not to do work, so Krishna says, might as well do it. So same way, if the same person with the same qualification chooses to do work, he becomes Karma Yogi. But if the same person renounces the work, he becomes a Jnana Yogi. So Krishna says, however, Karma Yoga is better. Why? By nature, the soul is very, very active. It's very hard to make the soul sit in one place. You can look at the kids many times. You ask them to just keep quiet, they won't. You ask them to not talk, they will talk. You make a rule, they will break it. But you give a toy to play with, they'll be happy, busy playing with. Okay, you give an activity, coloring, they will do. Or you ask them to write something, they will do. Our mind is also the same way. Our soul is also the same way. Acting in the same way. Okay, the soul, because it's been engaged in this body, it looks for different platforms of security. It tries to find that security in job, tries to find that security in relationships, tries to find that level of security in the happiness which it gets. And soul's nature is to go for permanent situation. But then until you bring the soul to the process of Bhakti Yoga, it will try something and then it will get frustrated. Relationship will break. You will get kicked out of the job, made redundant. You try to create something, build, earthquake comes and destroys your home, so on and so forth. No matter how much you hard to make your situation stable, steady, the soul will never be satisfied because by nature, change is the only constant thing in this world, as they say. So until the soul is brought to a platform wherein it does an activity and it has access to a permanent situation, that is the most satisfying thing. That is the most happiest thing. The soul will actually find himself in, or herself in. So that's why this is very important, that soul is actually engaged in something which is more natural to its condition, to its constitutional position, which is to do activity. So Krishna says, citing all these reasons, that therefore Arjuna, you should go for Karma Yoga. Very strong arguments, and you will never see Arjuna arguing back on this point again, ever in Gita. So Arjuna will never actually say, okay, I'm going to go to forest after 5th chapter. He won't. Okay, so this is very important. It's interesting between Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, talking about the pleasure which the soul tries to find in this material world. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he gives an example of a circus. And it's a allegorical story, but it will tell us the futile attempt of the soul to enjoy in this material world and how each of its attempts it's been thwarted. So he says in a certain village, there was a company that came, established its circus, and then it raised a huge sentry around that, huge wall, compound around the circus. Nobody can even peep in and see what's happening there. It's very, very high. And then they put a very small gate, and they made the people queue up, asked them to pay heavy fees to come inside. but they allowed only one person at a time inside. So there is this huge queue of people, practically the entire village, fighting to get in, and each one were ready to pay 10 times the usual fare, and they charged them exorbitant rates, the ticket. First person comes in, and much to his surprise, when he comes in, the gate behind him gets shut. And then he looks around, there's nothing inside. And there is few of these hefty, well-built men come, and they beat him black and blue. Completely beating him to pulp, and then open the back gate and throw this body out, and they close. This guy is still barely alive, and he comes out, and he waits, yet to come in terms with what happened. Meanwhile, the second guy also comes in from the outside. Door is shut, same treatment. He's thrown out. Now, the second person comes out. By the time the first person is recovered a little bit. Usually, look at the human psychology. When you go, walk down the lane somewhere, and you trip and fall, what's the first thing you do? You look around and see if anyone watched you. That's the first thing you do, generally. And then comes, okay, you'll try to, address the actual issue. So same thing, the second guy comes out. So the first guy asks him, so how was it? Second guy says, wow, it was really fantastic. And the second guy asked the first guy, how was your experience? He said, beyond this world. So the first guy thinks, it didn't work just for me, but except me, for everyone else it's working. And second guy also thinks the same way. He thinks only my experience is negative, but actually everyone else was having a good time. See, the first guy is also telling us, proving that premise, that he had a great experience. Third guy comes, he asks the first two, same. He tells that he had great experience, the other two also repeat the same. Entire village come out, and entire village actually believed that, except them, each and everyone in that village actually had a good time in the circus. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, this is how material world works. Very powerful example. Prabhupada always used to say, after being embarrassed, Prabhupada, EMBARR, I think, or RASSED, embarrassed by your attempt to gratify the senses. So Prabhupada says, this is exactly how material world also works. Prabhupada says, you go to a hospital, some guy met with an accident, he'll be lying, they would have tied one of his leg up because he fractured it or something like that. And you ask him, how are you? Prabhupada says, he'll still say, I'm fine. Prabhupada says, what's so fine about your position? But generally, that's how it is, because it's a superficial question. People answer also in a very, very superficial way. So material world is like a circus, as Prabhupada actually says in that example. So we have to really understand what is it that we are looking for, what is it that really connects with us, gives us satisfaction deep down in our existence, deep down in the core existence of us. And that's what we should go for. And that's what, when Krishna uses the word knowledge, that's what Krishna talks about. All of us have this experience. When you come to Krishna consciousness, one thing you will see, especially when you read the books, especially if you are following any other process. I used to follow one other process of spirituality. And there I was taught that if you're so strong, if you're determined, even you can take next poison, it will become ineffective. Things like that. If you think you can control the rain, I never tried, but you can. Okay, you come from such background and you read, Prabhupada says, we are conditioned souls. We cannot do anything. Initially, when you read Prabhupada's books, it will come across to you sometimes as something negative. But to actually tell a person, let's say someone who is afflicted with cancer, to tell him hey, you are going to die if you don't take a medication. It's in a beginning stage. If you do something, it can be cured. Even though on an immediate level, it looks like a negative news or something which is very not so ideal news for him to hear. But if you really look at the well-wishing tendency of the person who's actually giving the news, we can appreciate. Okay, give it another 2-3 years time, you will see that because of that timely intervention, because of that timely information, a person's life is saved, so on and so forth. So same way, when we study Bhagavad Gita, Yes, on one hand, Bhagavad Gita hits on us again and again that this world is temporary, it's only miserable, it's everything you start, initially it will be like a nectar, as the time progresses, it will become like a poison and everything. However, if you carefully read pages of Bhagavad Gita, you will also understand not just this negative temporal nature of this material world, but also we are eternal. We are deathless. What can be more positive than that? What news can be more positive than that? Everyone has fear for death. You take a small animal, you take somebody who's on a deathbed also, he's also scared. Somebody who has lived for 120 years, still he will have the fear for death. And Bhagavad Gita comes and tells us like, hey, you are free from death. You are immortal. So even though superficially it tells us things which are a bit more grotesque, things which are not so ideal for us to hear, but if you study it carefully, we can understand the compassionate nature of these scriptures, compassionate nature of Bhagavad Gita, compassionate nature of this stark reality. Or rather, compassionate nature of this book informing us of the stark reality of this material world. Okay, so the first 6 verses, Krishna citing all these reasons, he tells to Arjuna, therefore, practice Karma Yoga. It's easy to get result in this. It's very natural to you. It gives the same result, and in fact, you don't need to separately cultivate any knowledge. Simply by practicing this Karma Yoga, knowledge will come as a byproduct to you. So why waste time sitting and cultivating knowledge? Just continue. Second section, performance of Nishkama Karma Yoga. So from 7 to 12, you will see the same concept of Nishkama Karma Yoga that was explained in 3rd chapter being reiterated, but it will also tell in what quality, what consciousness should a person perform these activities? In what consciousness should one approach performing this process of Nishkama Karma Yoga? So you can read that. Again, it's the same 3 attributes. You do your activity as a matter of duty. You do in knowledge. Now, on the aspect of knowledge, is you are not the body, you are the soul. Is that alone the knowledge? No. That's just the beginning level of knowledge. But there is more to it. Is that the only thing we have studied so far? No. We read that Krishna is the Supreme Lord. We read about Jiva. We read about Paramatma. We read about the connecting process as yoga. We read about the process of sacrifice. We read about transcendental knowledge. Everything. But the underlying foundational principle for all of this is, you are not the body, you are the soul. Everything put together is what Krishna terms as working in knowledge. Everything that is based on this fundamental truth that we are not the body, we are the soul. Okay? This knowledge in its entirety, the relationship between each one of these aspects, the way how you communicate with each other, the way how we deal with the demigods by means of sacrifice, everything put together in its entirety is what Krishna calls us working in knowledge. So in Nishkama Karma Yoga, when we say we work in knowledge, this is what we mean in its entirety. But you can see, when Krishna spoke about Bhagavad Gita, spoke about Nishkama Karma Yoga in 3rd chapter, the only knowledge which Arjuna had was, you are not the body, you are the soul. But then Krishna builds up after that. 4th chapter, now 5th chapter when he takes, now he goes in its entirety, as I said. That's the superset which Krishna is talking about. So whenever we talk about knowledge, we mean everything. But on the fundamental building block of, we are not the body, we are the soul. That takes us to the next section. Knowledge, the 3 doers. As we were discussing before, in our body, we think we are the only living entity inside, but there are many more living entities inside us. So similarly, we think we are the only doer, but actually there are multiple doers. We are not the only doers. So Krishna in this section, he will explain that it's not just the soul, or it's not just the living entity that just does the activity, but there are more than one doers who are also assisting the jiva in performing the activity. Baladev Vidyabhushan is one of our predecessor acharyas. He writes a commentary on Bhagavad Gita called Gita Bhushana. I think that's translated by Bhanu Maharaj. There is an example that's given, and if you remember that analogy, you'll understand about the position of these three doers. He gives the example of a woodcutter cutting a tree. Now, when we say woodcutter cuts a tree, there are three people that are involved, or three aspects rather that's involved. One is the woodcutter himself, second is his hand, and the third is the axe. Baladev Vidyabhushan says, this woodcutter is Paramatma, this hand is the jiva or the soul, and this axe is the prakriti or the nature. And how do these three correlate? Jiva desires to do an activity. Paramatma sees if the jiva deserves to do that activity to fulfill that desire. And then depending on that, he sanctions it. And Mother Nature executes that activity. So for any activity that we actually do, there are these three personalities that are involved. Prakriti is what we call Durga, Mother Nature. She is a personality. So any activity, could be speaking, any activity that you do with our body, with our senses, mind, gross or subtle, doesn't matter. There are these three personalities that is involved. So hand is just jiva. So if I'm the woodcutter, how much control does the hand wield? Not much. It totally depends on the will of the three. Who holds the maximum control? The person. So that is Paramatma. That's the Supreme Lord. And then hand is just a in-between, or go-between, the personality and the axe. And the axe, that's the actual weapon with which a tree is actually cut. So these three personalities are the actual doers. So to understand that Jiva alone is not the doer, but he is actually doing in conjunction, working in conjunction with the Prakriti and Paramatma, Krishna says that is complete knowledge. So when we do an activity, we need to understand. Yudhishthira Maharaj in Mahabharata, he says, to do any activity, there are three aspects that are required. One is the focus, second is the endeavor, the activity itself, and the third most important deciding factor is Daiva. Daiva means the demigods or higher authorities, the sanction of the higher authorities. Which means the same activity, if you do in the same way, focusing on the same way, won't necessarily produce the same result all the time. You will see, even you take cooking, that's one area where you can always realize. You'll follow the exact same recipe, everything will be the same, but it won't turn out well. Or you will go to a movie, or even if you watch the same movie again, or you want to go to anything, you come to even temple, for example. Our mindset changes so much. Okay, we don't control anything at all. So for any activity to be successful, all these three aspects have to come in line. One is we need to focus on the activity, we need to endeavor, and we need the sanction of the higher authorities. This is what Yudhishthira Maharaj says in Mahabharata. Now, Krishna analyzes this to a much more deeper level. We'll study this in the later chapters, 13, 14, and 15. But for now, we can limit our understanding with these verses, whatever these verses actually talk about. So these three aspects, these are the ones that determine what activity we do and what result we actually get. Good question. Somebody emailed me this question last week also. How much are we answerable to our activities if, after reading this section? So, given that there is Paramatma who is sanctioning, there is Prakriti that's facilitating. So, Krishna has to take a certain share of my karma, correct? I don't like a guy, I'm going to kill somebody. So I get, I don't know, life sentence or life imprisonment, 20 years. Maybe Krishna should take half of that. What about Prakriti? Maybe another 5? I can go in for 5 years and I can come out. I should get released. So where do we draw the line? How much are we really answerable to our activity? Good question. Any activity that we actually do, it's due to ignorance if the result of that activity is sin, which is true outside of the realm of Krishna consciousness. We'll study in detail in Nectar of Devotion, but I'll just briefly touch on this one. So any activity that we do is based on the understanding, avidya. Avidya means ignorance. And what is that ignorance means? That we are the body. We are going with that premise. So that is avidya and that's ignorance. Anything that we do on a bodily level always ends up in sin, whether we like it or not. Even if I was giving this example, you just breathe in. You know how many microbes you are killing? So much. You light a stove, you know how many microorganisms we are killing. You sweep. There are 5 different Mahashuna, it's given 5 Mahapapa, the greatest sins actually. We kill living organisms when we sweep, when we even put a water pot. You know how many underneath we don't know we are killing. When we light a stove, so many things like that. So you don't need to do anything extra. You just live in this world. Moment after moment, we'll just be incurring more and more and more sins. Extremely hard. That's why when we practice Krishna consciousness, the end justifies the means. So because we are completely dedicating our whole existence for the pleasure of the Lord, we are dedicating the whole existence simply to serve the Supreme Lord. So every impurity that we incur in the execution of that activity gets spiritualized, gets nullified. So that's how Bhakti Yoga is actually justified, that simply by performing Bhakti Yoga, because it becomes a sin because I'm trying to destroy something or destroying something which I didn't create. But Krishna is the owner of everything and Krishna says, bring that. So I go there, in the process I kill 2-3 microorganisms. It's still justified because I'm serving the Supreme Lord, He will take care. He will revive all of them again. That's His problem, it's not my problem. So that's why to practice in the realm of Krishna consciousness, inside the boundary of Bhakti Yoga, that's the most safest position to be in. Because we also saw, we can't just sit idle. That's not possible. We have to do something. But then anything you do in the mode of ignorance, which means not understanding, not realizing we are the soul, actually leads to sin. So where do we draw the line? Any activity that you do, it's going to incur sin. Prabhupada says, even if you kill plants, we are actually killing only. Forget about killing animals. Killing plants is also killing. So Prabhupada says, simply by killing plants and being a vegetarian, Prabhupada says it doesn't make you free from sin. That's why we kill the plant, cook, offer it to Krishna. Krishna accepts everything and then Krishna gives his remnants. So what we take is food which is not cooked for us. So that should tell us how important it is for us, the consciousness with which we cook, consciousness with which we offer to the Supreme Lord. Very, very important. Okay, so any activity that we do, without this knowledge of Atma Vidya, Atma Tattva, that incurs sin. That's why this knowledge is important. Now coming to the question, how much are we answerable? Generally when we do any activity, there is a karma that comes with that, except if we do devotional service. Any activity that we do brings with it, it's karma. If we do good activity, we saw last week, we get piety. If we do bad activity, we get sins. So that's why we say we don't want piety, we don't want sins, so we do devotional service, in which we are not going to take ownership for any of the results, we are just going to offer everything to Krishna. If we do that, then we get untainted by either piety or sins, good karma or bad karma. We can still continue living in this world without any strings attached, and then at the end of the life, when you quit this body, you'll go back to the spiritual world. Easy. Now, somebody who is not following Bhakti Yoga, what is his destination? If you study these verses carefully, it will tell who is the one who is starting all this activity. It's the Jiva. Generally, even if you go for, I don't know how local Australian law works, but in Indian Penal Code, this is how it works. If there is a guy who orders an assassin to go and kill somebody, and he kills, both the assassin as well as his boss, both of them gets caught. The boss gets maximum punishment. In other words, one who initiates the activity, he gets maximum punishment. So who initiated the activity? Who desires? So we get the maximum. Now, Krishna, does he mean that he's going to get minimum? No. Krishna is the Supreme Lord, he is aloof. He's just creating the system. Prabhupada gives the example, just because the government creates a prison house doesn't mean it welcomes everyone to come and join there. As matter of duty, it's creating. So that's Prabhupada's argument, logic. So same way, Krishna, his job is to, not job, he just created this facility for all these conditioned souls to come, lead this life, and whatever the jiva desires, Krishna just sanctions it as a well-wisher. Okay, so Krishna doesn't take anything, Prakriti also doesn't take anything. The person who desires to do something, that's the person that takes all the karma. Now, another interesting question that came. When I replied back this question, the devotee replied me back with another question. That means if I do one activity, bad karma is going to come to me. It's going to influence me to do bad activity again. Again, I'm going to do more bad. Which means if I do one sin, it's enough for me to glide down to hell. Usually when you answer a question, this is something last week we were discussing. I mean, not with this group, in another. Somebody was asking me how to answer a question in a class. Usually when you hear a question, if you hear it attentively, you will see at one point there will be a premise which will usually be wrong or which will be hazy. The premise with which this question is asked is, yes, first you do a sin, and then you get a karma because of that, and then you act. In the next life, let's say you die, you are born again. This karma is going to come and force you to do the next activity. So that's the premise with which this question is asked. Now, karma can't force. Maya can't force. The jurisdiction of Maya and karma, this is very important, is to create the situation, that's all. Which means if I do something bad now, and I incur a sin, I die. Next life I'm born again. My bad karma can only create a situation. It can never force me. And it's very important because it's a very, very positive news. It's a very, very liberating news. Otherwise, as this question went, you just do one activity at one point and that's it. All you can do is just like glide down to the hell. Because it's going to go worse and worse and worse. After some time, it's going to be like autopilot mode. Next life, you are born again, and you get forced to do an activity. Next life, again, you are born, it's going to build up more, like an avalanche of sins. So where is the end? So the way how Krishna's system is not unfair, it's very, very fair. So when you are born again, what happens is, the karma which we incurred in the previous life will create a situation. Which means, if you do a bad karma there, the situation is going to be pretty bad. But the choice is still ours. We still hold the choice. We still have the final say. Okay? Just because I'm born in a sinful environment doesn't mean I have to do sinful activity. It's not. We see so many examples. Valmiki. We see Prahlad Maharaj. He was born in a demoniac family. Okay, so the choice is always ours. Now, question will come about astrology. Astrology is the science that predicts the future. Astrology can predict only the situation. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was an expert in astrology. He even did a research work on astrology, and he published his work in the name Surya Siddhanta. That's why he got the name Siddhanta Saraswati. After mastering astrology, he just gave up one day. And when asked why is he giving up, he says, astrology tells me everything. It tells me the situation, it tells me whether one is going to become rich, poor, everything. However, one thing which astrology can't predict is the Krishna factor. When Krishna was born, if you read a Krishna book or if you read a 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, you will see when Krishna was born, actually all the stars realign themselves. Which means Krishna comes and he overrides everything, the law of nature. Which means anybody who takes a shelter of Krishna, Krishna will come. Remember, what was the underlying statement in every verse according to Jiva Goswami? Do not fear. Ma Suchaha. So simply by taking shelter of Krishna, this situation can be altered. That's the power of Krishna consciousness. Now, how much can our karma, previous karma, influence us? Only till this extent. How much can our astrology predict? Only till this extent, which means it will predict on such and such date, this particular jiva will be in this situation. How exactly is this jiva going to react in that situation? That's totally up to the jiva. For example, if the jiva was a chain smoker in the previous life, hypothetically, in a situation it will predict is, there will be a pack of cigarette here. Now, by now, this jiva might have become a Hare Krishna, you know. So then, this situation is ruled out already. That's the power of association. Okay, so karma can influence only the situation. But by practicing Krishna consciousness, we can wipe out. Why? We are invoking Krishna in our life. Okay? So same way, how much can Maya influence us? Maya's position is also that she can come only till this point. If she touches, she is breaching her line of demarcation. She can't. She can't pester us. But she will create a situation that will influence us. But the choice is always ours. Okay, so situation is not all that gloomy. But we can, rather than putting ourselves in that firing line, most intelligent thing to do, we were discussing about this story of Prishadra, how he got the curse, but how did he counteract? By chanting Hare Krishna, he just goes back to the spiritual world. So rather than waiting and reacting to it, something which is a bit more wise to do is to go on an attack. Attack is the best form of defense. We just practice Krishna consciousness, that's it. And we just go with that, go with the flow. We don't care about the karma. Karma will just wait. We'll starve the karma and the karma will go away. That's what we have to do. Otherwise, if we have to sit, look at astrology, look back, what did I do in my past life, previous life, even in this life, even after becoming Hare Krishna, this morning when I cheated that devotee, when he closed his eyes, I stole the pakora. What can you do? It happens. But if you have to sit and worry about each one of this, it's really, as I said, situation will be very, very gloomy. So Krishna says it's fine, as long as you do your duty, every activity has its own impurity attached with it. So simply by practicing Krishna consciousness, we can rid ourselves of all the good and bad influence of that. And simply by practicing Krishna consciousness, we can go back to the spiritual world. Okay? So Krishna, what he is advising is simply practice Nishkama Karma Yoga. We saw it's Bhakti Yoga. Simply by doing that, we don't need to go through all of this. Again, we are studying all of this to just understand, that's all. But we don't need to become overly paranoid about, okay, is this going to become karma? Is this vikarma? Then nobody can understand us. It's a problem. Okay? So that's the answer to that question. So of the three doers, still the sanction is actually done by Paramatma. However, the karta, the one who started it, is always the jiva. And because of that, obviously he takes the punishment or he takes the reward. Liberation, focusing on the super soul. That's the next section. One who is in knowledge. Again, knowledge means what? Now, everything. Jivatma, Paramatma, Prakriti, activity, karma, Nishkama Karma Yoga, Karma Kanda, practically everything. Yes? This is from verse 17 to 26. That's the next section. It talks about, Krishna introduces, he already introduced actually in the previous section itself, super soul, which is Paramatma. One who is in knowledge devotionally fixes his consciousness on the super soul and remains materially equipoised, attains liberation in near future. It's an interesting section. Let's read the translation. Go to verse 17. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and proceeds straight on the path of liberation. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with an equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater. Why? In Vedic culture, when you see the other person, you usually do pranam. You do pranam for who? To the super soul. When your feet accidentally touches someone's body, we usually touch the person as a mark of respect and we say, please forgive. Because it's almost equivalent to kicking the residence of the Lord, kicking the Lord. Even if you look at the Vaishnava attire or Vaishnavi attire, we have tilak.
If you go to Vedic temples in India, especially from outside, you can, even without a board, actually many temples, they don't have a board, but they have markings. Simply, if you look at the marking, you will understand, okay, this building is special, and this building is marked as the residence of the Lord. So same way, we are marking the whole body as the temple of the Lord. So that's why we put tilak in 12 places of the body with the mantras. In every temple, you will have Dvajastamba, or the flag tree. The purpose of flag tree, usually in Vedic culture also, you'll see, even in Mayapur, if you go, on Gaura Purnima, they have what they call as the Adivas, okay, invoking auspiciousness. One day before Gaura Purnima, they have this ceremony, Adivas, which is the initial ceremony. Usually they hoist the flag. Reason for hoisting the flag is because the demigods are there up. That's the SMS for them. We are going to celebrate. So when they see the flag from a temple, they know there is a function there. Then they come down in disguise to participate in that. So that's a welcome to all the demigods, to all the 330 million demigods to come and participate. So that's the flag tree. And then when the festival finishes, they lower the flag and they pull, which means, okay, time up, see you next time. So they'll go back. So any temple, it actually has a flag tree. So that's what Shika represents. Okay. So in Vedic culture, everything that you actually do has its meaning. Every name has its meaning. Even a person would be called based on the quality. Okay. Someone like, Shiva. Lord Shiva means one who invokes auspiciousness. That's his name. So likewise, each and every demigod also has its name. Each and every personality also has its name. Like Bhishma means one who has taken a terrible vow of celibacy, like that. Okay? Everything is self-explanatory. Everything is scientific. Why they actually do, why they did a certain aspect in the culture, why they followed a certain custom. If you study that deeply, you will see there is a reason behind that. So here, in this section, Krishna talks about Paramatma. So in verse 18, Krishna says, one who is in this knowledge of understanding that everyone's body has got two souls, one is the Jiva and the second is Paramatma, will deal with each other in a very respectful mood. Will actually see everyone to be the same. He won't see one to be rich, one to be beautiful, one ugly, one to be well off, one to be poor. He won't say anything like that. Why? Because inside each and every personality is Paramatma. He will show respect to that. So that's what this verse is actually talking about. So then naturally he'll be humble because he'll see the Supreme Lord everywhere. Imagine if our spiritual master comes into this room, we'll naturally feel humble because we know beyond doubt that he is much, much more devoted than us, much, much more knowledgeable than us, much, much more self-controlled than us. So naturally, it will bring humility to us. If only we are aware of this all-pervading aspect of the Supreme Lord, we will deal with not just humans, we'll deal with even plants because Paramatma lives even inside plants. Somebody asked me this question, does Paramatma live even inside the cell? Yes. Each and every cell has Paramatma in it. Technically, if we analyze, every single aspect of this material world has Paramatma in it, in every single atom. That's why I said, if we analyze, we'll even become paranoid. Can we really walk? What are we supposed to do? Fly? Then what about even in the atom in the air? Paramatma is still there. That's why Vedic culture is important. Prabhupada says, on the truth of following Vedic culture as it is, if you take Shankha, we blow. Shankha is just outer covering of a sea creature. If you touch a bone, your body becomes contaminated. Scriptures say. You have to take a shower. On the other hand, we have a Shankha, which is also falls under the category of bone. Okay, if you are any of your biology student, you will find there is a branch of vertebrates called mollusca. Okay, like a snail comes under that category. You touch a snail's shell, your body becomes contaminated. You have to take shower before going to the altar. Generally, your body is considered contaminated. However, you take Shankha, the conch. Conch is also similar such bone of an animal, nothing else. However, we celebrate it, worship it, we even offer water with that. So Prabhupada says, generally with our materialistic knowledge, you have to treat both of them same. But no, scriptures say one is more noble than the other. And Prabhupada also says, same way, cow dung is just the feces of an animal, basically. Any other animal's feces you touch, you are contaminated. However, cow dung alone is very, very pure. So Prabhupada says, that's why Vedic knowledge is very important. Otherwise, even in this world, there are a lot of contradictions if we have to go by our tiny knowledge. And if you carefully watch the versions of the atheists, their mind will go always for these contradictions, and they will think, that's why this is wrong. But that is wrong. Because they don't have that philosophical, spiritual basis. Because of that, they just look at the exceptions alone. They try to make exceptions as the norm, and then that causes confusion. Bhakti Vinod Thakur says, the way how Apasampradaya means that concocted, bogus sampradaya. Bhakti Vinod Thakur says, Apasampradaya starts when we take the extraordinary activity of an extraordinary personality and try to make a norm out of it. Okay, for example, you take a very extraordinary activity of somebody. Okay, Krishna, he danced with the gopis. I will also dance with the gopis. There's no gopis around, so I will also dance with pretty young girls. So you take the extraordinary activity of an extraordinary personality and to try to make a norm out of that. Then we become Sahajiyas, or we are said to have just formed Apasampradaya. So we have to be very, very careful when it comes to following scriptures. That's why Shukadeva Goswami, he wants elevated personalities, instructions we should hear, and we should follow their instruction. We should not imitate them. And he wants, if somebody wants to dance with Krishna, first you lift the Govardhan hill, Prabhupada says. First you imitate Govardhan Lila before you go for Ras Lila. Or if somebody says, I'm follower of Shiva, I'm going to drink some alcohol, he says, first you drink poison, because Shiva did that also, before you go to imitate that. Okay, so it's important that we follow the process properly and we follow the Vedic injunctions properly, because alone, with our own limited understanding, eyes will always go for only the contradictions, actually. So we have to be very, very careful. Sahajiya means one who, usually our process works gradually. Okay, start with the sadhu sangha, adav shraddha, faith, sadhu sangha, bhajana kriya, anartha nivriti. There are 9 steps that's given. When you go to the 9th stage in pure devotional level, it will be revealed to us. Now, it may happen now, it may happen after we go to the spiritual world. What is our eternal spiritual constitutional position with the Supreme Lord? Okay, I can be a dog. There are dogs in spiritual world. Dattatreya, he has a vehicle driven by dogs only. And they asked Prabhupada, are there mosquitoes in spiritual world? Prabhupada said yes. So it will be revealed, or it can be a peacock. You can be a peacock. So it will be revealed in the perfected stage of our Krishna consciousness, and then we resume our service from where we left off once we go back to the spiritual world. Sahajiyas means those who prematurely jump to that position, assuming, I think that's my eternal position, and they just act that way. If somebody is a peacock, they start to make sound as a peacock. They go. If somebody thinks, oh, I'm a Gopi, they then start to have illegal affairs. That's the problem. So that's why Apasampradaya has to be avoided. That's why Sahajiya tendency has to be avoided. It has to be curbed. Okay? So that's the Sahajiya. So we need to put faith in the process, and we need to follow this one slowly, and then gradually, as you see, as the scriptures themselves actually explain how this is going to actually act on us, work on us, whether we understand or not. We even saw, how are we going to gain the knowledge? We don't know, but we do. What's the proof? You look back, 4-5 years before you started Krishna consciousness, and you look now, there are many aspects of Krishna consciousness that you are very convinced of. Ekadashi, you don't even doubt. What if there is a sin? You don't even think, what if? No, I'm just following. Once they asked this question to Prabhupada, actually Prabhupada was playing a devil's advocate. Prabhupada goes for a morning walk and he says, sometimes people ask me, what if all of this is wrong? What if Krishna doesn't exist? So Prabhupada says, so be it. If Krishna, let's assume Krishna doesn't exist. Still, what is the loss? We come together, our mind is peaceful for now, we chant, we dance, we take prasad, we lead a very clean life, and we die. Still, we are better off than the karmis, who don't follow any proper lifestyle, and we are happy. But Prabhupada says, but what if Krishna exists? After doing all this, we'll go to spiritual world, and those rascals will come back to this material world. Once they even ask Prabhupada, you have written fools and rascals. What's the difference between fool and rascal? Prabhupada has a definition. Prabhupada is saying, fool means one who is actually dumb, and he does the wrong thing. Rascal means one who knows what is right and wrong, still he does the wrong thing. Prabhupada says, that's a rascal. And then Prabhupada quotes one famous Indian sannyasi and he says, he's a rascal, like that. Case study. So that's what Prabhupada says. So we have to be careful that scriptures are there to guide us. We simply take it, we follow it. There are some aspects of the change we'll be able to perceive, which are a bit more tangible, which even our friends would be able to notice. Many times they would say that there's a lot of change in you, there are a lot of transformation in you. We may not be able to, but it is noticeable. Okay, but as we follow in this process, then gradually, Prabhupada says slowly but steadily our process works. Okay, we'll move on. 22. An intelligent person does not take part in the source of misery which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise men do not delight in them. Prabhupada actually talks about sexual pleasure, which has a beginning and an end. So anything that has a beginning and an end means it's temporary, which means there will be a certain sense of attachment we have as we start to enjoy, but once we go beyond a certain point when we are going to lose, the same source of pleasure will become the greatest source of misery. So he says, so therefore a wise person does not take pleasure in them. Why? Because he knows it's not going to go on forever. And for that matter, Prabhupada in one lecture says, in terms of sensual pleasure, for that matter, any sense, not just sexual pleasure, could be anything. Could be for food, could be for watching movies, could be for anything. We have to ask ourselves, how long can we enjoy? And how much can we enjoy? Very limited. Very, very limited. We can't keep on. Prabhupada says, you can eat food, but there is a limitation with your body. Prabhupada says, you keep on eating, once you go past a certain point, your body is going to reject. You will have dysentery, Prabhupada is saying. Same source of pleasure will become source of pain, suddenly. So we live in a very, very limited world. So simply by studying this science, hearing about the science of Bhagavad Gita, if we understand the terms and conditions with which we are supposed to lead this life, we can follow. Otherwise, alone by ourselves, if we start to understand, decode this material world, it will lead to a lot of confusion. Okay, let's move on. Before giving up this present body, this is 23, if one is able to tolerate the urges of material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. Revolutionary point. Usually we think if we tolerate the urges of our senses, we will suffer. But look at what Krishna is saying here. I'll read it again. If one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. Interesting. Okay? Looks like the biggest source of our unhappiness is our conception of happiness. So we have a certain conception of happiness which is wrong, and Krishna is directly challenging here. We think just if you have a desire, just to fulfill it. Krishna is saying, yeah, fulfill it. Devamrita Maharaj, once he had a seminar topic, I saw how to have fun in the material world all the time, and then finally, and fool yourself. So basically, this material world is like that. There is no exceptions here when it comes to enjoying our senses. Sense enjoyment means it will lead to misery. We can keep trying it differently, but invariably it will come to the same conclusion over and over again. So Krishna here, he is saying, so what do? Rather than pursuing after this happiness, pursuing after this sense gratification, just let it go and tolerate, and by dint of that tolerance, we will feel happy. Let's move on. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward is actually the perfect mystic. Now we may think by staying away from sense gratification, I'm becoming very stone-hearted. I'm becoming very aloof from the world. I'm really cheating myself. Krishna is saying, no. How is he able to tolerate? Because he is experiencing a certain level of happiness by that tolerance, by not pursuing after sense gratification. So Krishna is saying, by dint of that pleasure, one is able to give up. 26th verse, those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. So Krishna is saying, simply by following this process of Nishkama Karma Yoga, acting in knowledge but being detached to all the results, one is assured of liberation. How? Simply by tolerance. You remember in second chapter also we saw Matra Sparshasta Kauntaya. And then by tolerance, what one becomes fit for liberation. So same way here, Krishna is reiterating that point, summing up all of the knowledge on Karma Yoga. So 27 and 28. So Krishna is now gonna introduce the Ashtanga Yoga process in 27 and 28. To explain this verse, 27 and 28, Krishna will speak an entire chapter, which is next chapter, 6. To expand on the last verse of this chapter, which is verse 29, Krishna will speak 6 chapters on that, which is Bhakti Yoga. So 27 and 28 in this chapter talks about Ashtanga Yoga, which will be elaborated in chapter 6. And 29th verse of this chapter talks about Bhakti Yoga, and it will be elaborated from chapters 7 to 12. Prabhupada briefly touches on the process of Ashtanga Yoga. So Krishna says, by cultivating this knowledge, working, one will be able to get liberated and then go back to spiritual world. Krishna is introducing Ashtanga Yoga, saying the same effect can also be achieved if one follows Ashtanga Yoga, which directly deals with meditating the Supreme Lord, basically. So that's how he makes the link. And then in verse 29, Krishna introduces Bhakti Yoga. Prabhupada touches on Ashtanga Yoga in verse 27 and 28. I'll briefly run through the different stages. There are 8 stages in Ashtanga Yoga. Yama, you can read in the purport, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. It's a very gradual process. If you understand the order, you'll understand the whole process. Yama simply means don'ts. Things which you are not supposed to do. No meat eating, intoxication, gambling, illicit sex. No sensual pleasure. No externally pursuing sense gratificatory process, anything. So that's Yama. Things which you are not supposed to do. That's all Yama. Niyama means the do's, things you are supposed to do. Okay, in Ashtanga Yoga it says you have to go to the forest, sit on a raised platform which is not too high nor too low. One should follow strict celibacy. One should abstain from complete sexual relationship. One should sit on a deer skin, so on and so forth. So the things which are do's, that's niyama. So that's the second step. So they are like the prerequisites, you can say. Asana, after you follow these 2 things, bath certain times in a day, 3 times in a day. Third step is asana. Asana is where you sit, you actually flex your muscles. So there are 8.4 million species and there are 8.5 million yogasanas. That's how many yogic postures there are, 8.5 million postures. So you sit there and you master, it will only take 10,000 years. And then, seriously, this process is for 60,000 years. That's how long it takes. It's a process for Satya Yuga. So that's Ashtanga Yoga. So Yama, Niyama, Asana. So here you master all the yogasanas, because to sit in meditation, living only on the air, keeping your body completely erect, without any external disturbance, you need to first condition your body. So it takes those long years actually to do that. So that's asana. Then comes pranayama. Once you are seated in that position, okay, now you control the breath. That's the breath work. So you can see it's going from more gross to subtle, slowly. So first 4 steps, there is no question of mind at all. This is the 5th step, pratyahara. After you do all of this, wherein you control the breath, then Ashtanga Yogi will be in a position to control his mind. Pratyahara is the stage where usually mind's nature is to go after sensual pleasure. Pratyahara means to catch hold of the mind and to bring it back. That's pratyahara. In other words, mind control. That's pratyahara. Then dharana. So mind was wandering, you caught it. Now you dragged it back. Now what do? You fix on something which is sublime. So that's dharana. Okay, wandering mind you caught, and then you fix on something. You can meditate on the super soul, you can meditate on Krishna. That's dharana. So once you fixed on him, now you meditate. That's dhyana. And then you just remain in trance. That's the samadhi. So the first 4 is more for the gross body. The last 4 is for the subtle body. This is Ashtanga Yoga, 8-step process. So in samadhi level, one will be seeing the Supreme Lord in the form of Paramatma. And then what is going to be his destination and everything we can discuss in the next chapter. So Krishna talks about it in detail in the next chapter. So the last verse, Prabhupada calls this as the peace formula verse. And Prabhupada says, if one remembers these three things, that the Lord is the enjoyer, the Lord is the proprietor, and the Lord is the friend. If one understands that, I am not the one to enjoy, but by giving pleasure to the Lord, I will naturally find enjoyment. If one understands that, I don't own anything. It's the Supreme Lord who is owning everything, which means I don't need to hanker for something I don't have. I don't need to feel insecure also for something I have with the fear of losing. I don't need to. He's the Supreme Lord. And the Supreme Lord Krishna, he is my friend. He knows everything about me. Usually, there are different attributes to the Supreme Lord. The Lord is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Omnipresent means the Supreme Lord is present everywhere. Omnipotent means He is all-powerful. He can do anything. These two we have no much problem accepting, but the third aspect, which is omniscient, we always have a problem with that. Does Krishna really know what I need in life? Does Krishna really know what I want? We have a problem there. So there, by practicing Bhakti Yoga, if we come to the position of completely understanding, okay, so Krishna knows exactly, He's my friend, He knows exactly what I want. If my mind may actually tell me that I desire something, I want it, but if still I don't get it, I should completely conclude that Krishna, being my friend, He wanted to protect me from acquiring it. So Krishna didn't bring that to me. So if somebody understands these three, Prabhupada says, he will be peaceful. Okay, we'll stop here. So with this, chapter 6 finishes. As I said, this chapter 27 and 28 will be elaborated in Ashtanga Yoga. With that, Yoga ladder process will finish. And then in verse 29, Krishna introduced Bhakti Yoga, which is going to elaborate. Any questions? Yes. Say that again. Oh, I want to go back to Godhead. I think somebody asked this question again. I think you didn't come to that class. That one class. I was quoting Nectar of Devotion. Anyabhilashita shunyam. Which means, Rupa Goswami says, pure devotional service means, instead of saying Anyabhilasha, he's saying Anyabhilashita. There's a difference. Anyabhilasha means there's no other desire except direct service of Krishna. Anyabhilashita means that there's no other desire other than the desire to satisfy Krishna. And there's only one more desire that's actually allowed there, which is anything that is conducive to fulfilling that desire of Krishna. In other words, it can be direct devotional service or indirect devotional service, which means I can think, if I get a proper job, I'll be able to be in a bit stable, like in a bit more stable of mind, and then that will allow me to focus on my Krishna consciousness properly. It's still okay. Krishna is our friend. We can go and ask Him that way. But if I think I want to be this multimillionaire tomorrow, otherwise I'm going to go into this depression cycle, we have a problem. I think you fall under karma kandi then. So then that is not allowed. Okay, so how much ever that's required to practice our bhakti, it's devotional service too. Okay, so to answer your question, to go back to the spiritual world for what? To do sense gratification? No. To go and do pure devotional service to Krishna, that desire alone is allowed. It still comes under pure devotional service. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Prabhu.
Probably a dumb question.
Nothing is dumb.
But what was the desire that took us away from the spiritual world?
Good question. I don't have time for that.
Was it to be God?
Yes. In short, we all, okay, I'll tell you in the shortest form possible. We are all in the spiritual world, and we said in the first class also, there are two types of jivas also, Nitya Siddha and Nitya Baddha. Nitya Siddha means eternally perfected souls. Nitya Baddha means eternally conditioned souls. Okay? So we have that tendency within us to do mistake. We have the tendency within us to fall down from the spiritual world. Okay, so we are all there in the spiritual world. We wanted to enjoy away. Now, when they asked Prabhupada, how did we get this desire? Prabhupada says it's just like a bad dream. It was just a thought. But the thought is so powerful, for us it looks like eternity. It's just a moment, less than a moment in spiritual world. But we are in this realm of time, so it looks a bit more arduous than what we thought. It's not a passing thought. Even a passing thought in spiritual world is almost an eternity here. That's how it works. You take Brahma is a small, 1 second is much more here. So you go all the way to spiritual world. So it's like eternity here. Understand?
The reason I ask is because with the whole idea of the three doers, it feels like we're really nothing. We've been given nothing. We've been given what we've desired.
Yep. Initially, when we came to from spiritual world to material world, all of us took birth as Brahma. And each one of us were given a whole universe to play with. And there were some of us who were a little intelligent, who thought, this is going nowhere. So they didn't slide down and they just went back. From Brahma, they just like meditated and they went back. But who you see in this room? So we, including you, me, everyone, we all thought maybe we should try a bit more. And then we started to glide down, and then we are in human form of life now. However, human form of life is still good because there are 14 planetary systems. Ours is in the 7th. Even if we take a building, right? There are 7 floors up and there is 7th floor. What is the easy way out? Ground floor. That's where we are, actually. So even though, yes, we are not in a so pleasurable position, still among the 14 different planetary systems, we are in a much more conducive position. Okay? Based on our actions, we will have to either suffer or enjoy by taking birth again and again. Why is it still said we go to either hell or heaven? Who said that? We say it. In colloquial terms, we say you go to hell, you go to heaven. It's not like that. Based on our actions, we will have to either suffer or enjoy by taking birth again and again. But in what species? Okay, so there are 8.4 million species. As humans, let's say here, there are few possibilities. If you are a Hare Krishna, you will go to spiritual world. You won't take birth in any other floor. So you go to spiritual world. If you do some pious activity, you go to one of the higher planetary systems. If you do impious activity, you will go to one of the lower planetary systems. If you do really, really horrible, prohibited activity, you will go to hellish planet. That's below the 14 planetary system. Get yourself corrected, and then you will come back again in some other planet, and then you climb up. Or somebody may take birth again as a human being. Basically, it's only very few possibilities there. So heaven and hell means usually we tend to think above is heaven and below is hell. Actually, hell is even below than the below. There are 7 planetary systems below us. Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Rasatala, Mahatala, Patala. Below Patala is the heavenly, hellish planets actually. Don't worry, we'll study that in 5th canto of Bhagavatam. Why does Krishna introduce Ashtanga Yoga after he has established that Arjuna should do Karma Yoga? As we said, Krishna is speaking Bhagavad Gita not just for Arjuna, first of all. Krishna tells to Arjuna that so far whatever I've actually explained it to you in Nishkama Karma Yoga, same result you can actually get by Ashtanga Yoga also for the sake of completion. So Krishna is introducing Ashtanga Yoga. Just because he's telling doesn't mean he recommends that. Same as with Jnana Yoga also. And then Krishna tells him, by the way, so far I've told you Nishkama Karma Yoga, you have to become a Bhakti Yogi. I understand our course that we are studying in line with Bhakti Shastri course guidelines. Thus requesting to please connect us to examiner. We are not doing Bhakti Shastri course guideline, actually. We are not. Bhakti Shastri course guideline, I did Bhakti Shastri, so we clearly first established the course. Course means, you take a river, for example, okay? Comes from the hills or from the mountains it can take one of the different path. Okay, so then that path is actually determined and then it goes that way. So that's a course, literally. Bhakti Shastri course means we clearly go with the lesson plan for every chapter. We clearly tell, are we going to go verse by verse or are we going to go based on a theme, so on and so forth. This scripture study course is about studying Prabhupada's books, going deeper in Prabhupada's books and studying, taking knowledge, developing the habit of reading Prabhupada's books for 2 hours every week. That's what this course is about. And we are getting ourselves acquainted. As you can see, there are so many concepts. We can't just learn everything in one go. So we are going to go. First get acquainted with that, then we'll go deeper. But as we go, as I said, the first 6 chapters, because it touches a lot on the concepts, there is so many things I had to rush on. But Bhakti Shastri, it's a different course in it altogether. We are not doing Bhakti Shastri. This is a scripture study course. However, if you bring any Bhakti Shastri course questions, you'll be able to answer. You'll be able to, concepts-wise, knowledge-wise, we are not compromising on it. But in terms of the structure that we are following, we are doing something which is more contemporary, which is more suited for our audience, rather than somebody who just sits and dedicatedly studies that course for 6 hours every week. We are not there. We are not going there. We may not. We always have a choice, but why does it sometimes seem so hard to overcome our addictive behavior or to engage in devotional service instead? It is lust only, Arjuna. That's exactly the answer. That's the eternal enemy. As soon as we came to this material world, lust also came along with us. As I said, lust is used in a more general sense in the scriptures as being attachment to something very, very dear to us. So that's the reason. If Krishna loves us so much, when he can create Maya to make us forget him, why did he not create something that we never forget him? He didn't create Maya to make us forget, actually. Just like a government, going back to that example, government created the prison house. Does the government created only the prison house? No. It laid roads, traffic signal, there is secretariat, there is parliament, there is so many other things. But we are looking at only prison and we say government created only prison. No. We have to broaden our perspective and we see how much, Krishna created Radha Gopinath temple. Krishna himself is here. Krishna is giving us scriptures. Krishna is giving us a holy name. Krishna is giving us prasad. Krishna is giving us everything practically. So not just Maya to divert us. Krishna is giving much, much more options for us to remember him. Okay? So that's how we should see the arrangement of Krishna. In fact, this whole creation, 3/4 is spiritual world. So 3/4 is created to remember him. Only 1/4 is created to forget him. It's our super intelligence to have given up the 3/4 and come here, and here we are blaming Krishna also. Come on. Totally unfair. Okay, before we leave, I just request your attention for another 3 to 4 minutes. I invited Lalita Priya Mataji. Even though Hare Krishna movie has become world famous, there are still many among us, even in Mayapur TV also. Whenever I talk to devotees, there are many who haven't heard about it. Mataji contributed so much in the making of the movie, so I thought it will be good to hear from her a few words about that movie, and also she'll talk about the DVD release also. Just please be seated. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Give it to friends, family. And for those who haven't seen it, we're inviting you to watch it to learn more about Prabhupada and appreciate his amazing life story. Something that we also have coming available, if anyone's interested in distributing the film, if you go out on books or something, is we're creating these little cards with a code that the people you give those codes to, they can go to online and get the film and stream it. And we're making that available at a much lesser cost. So the DVD is about, I think in Australian dollars, it's maybe 25 or 30. Yeah, sorry, I should know these details. And it's $12.99 to buy, to stream online, and you get all the special features and deleted scenes which didn't make the movie. So it's really nice. It's in all these different languages, including Hindi. It's going to be soon available in lots of different languages in India. So if you are a book distributor or you would just like to distribute it, we're going to be creating these little cards that you can hand out on the street, and people can like give a donation for like $2, $3 or something. So it's a way to really make the film accessible for the public. So if you would like to learn more about that, you can either contact myself or the temple, and we'll make those available for you. Okay, so thank you for your time.
जगत गुरु श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय, गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय, भक्तवृंद की जय, हरि बोल।